Good morning, everybody. Welcome today. This is Paul Cramey. I'm facing some weather challenges here, so if your screen suddenly goes blank, it's because I lost power. We did earlier this morning already. Today, we're going to cover just a little bit of history of software-based pricing systems, review some area-based pricing templates in control. Then we'll talk a little bit about how costs are determined by control. And then we'll flip back and wrap up today with some review templates for both area and cost-based pricing. The first one that I referenced, this one right here on the agenda, is area-based pricing where we're not looking at and not considering costs at all. And then we'll repeat that down here at the end, and we'll do area-based pricing where there is costing involved. Obviously, in cost-based pricing, there's always costs. Then on Thursday, we're going to, I'll come back and I'll start off the session with a review of some samples that I have done for a couple of different substrates. We'll probably, in the interest of time, we'll probably focus on just one of those samples. And then after we've done that, then we'll go through a tool that may be able to find helpful in helping you to determine exactly what your hourly cost per hour should be of your equipment, and then wrap up the day with a similar kind of a tool that will help you determine what your hourly labor cost. And when I say labor costs, I'm talking about overhead, I'm talking about wages paid for production people, and I'm talking about taxes and benefits that are the owner's responsibility. I'm going to minimize this well, actually, let me flip over to control. We're not going to go there quite yet, but all right.
Paul, did you want to mention about the handout?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Linda. Thank you.
Okay.
Notice on the GoToWebinar gizmo that comes up when you log in, down at the bottom, there's a tab called Handouts, and there is a handout for today, one handout, and I would really, really encourage you to download that so that you can kind of follow along. I'm going to be referencing that handout quite extensively today. More importantly, on Thursday, this one will be reposted, and there are 4 handouts that we will be using on Thursday. So as soon as you log in, just go ahead and download those handouts. Do the one for today, and then do the same thing on Thursday. Thanks for reminding me, Linda. Just to get started. Prior to 1990, that's kind of the year that I started to get involved. There really wasn't what I would consider to be a viable, generally available software program that was geared to the industry and geared to producing pricing. There may have been some proprietary ones out there. There may have been some homegrown ones out there, but as a general rule, there really wasn't anything readily available to the industry. From my experience and others that I've talked to, it wasn't uncommon that owners would actually have a Rolodex file, or they would just simply have had paper worksheets that contained their pricing. And typically those were geared either to cut vinyl, which was the most common, really wasn't much in the way of digital stuff at that time, maybe some screen printing and things like that, but it was all paper-based pricing. And it was typically geared to size and quantity and the number of colors, if it was cut vinyl, and whether it was a single or double-sided. production costs were just flat not a factor. There was virtually no consideration of cost. So the bottom line in that period of time is that the challenge was you wanted to make the pricing, the area pricing, high enough so that you had some degree of comfort that you were at least covering your material costs, but there was, to extend that to the equipment and the labor side. So you wanted to have some feeling that you were covering your fixed costs, which is typically I refer to as overhead. And you wanted to have some assurance that you were providing a degree of profit, gross profit margin. But you also had to be low enough so that you had some degree of success in winning the business from clients. Then, beginning in the 1989, 1990, early 90s, that's when the first deliberate, dedicated point of sale software became on the scene. The one that I was familiar with at that time was called Activity POS, APOS, and it was introduced, I believe, in the 1989 timeframe. Basically, what they did was they took these Rolodex things that I talked about, or price sheets, and they reverse engineered how the pricing worked, geared to those Rolodex file cards or price sheets. And they did that by inventing a they called it breakpoint pricing. It's really nothing more than some degree of discounting. So they would establish an extremely high area charge because there wasn't anything related to one-time charges for setup. There wasn't anything related to per piece charges. There may have been some degree of allocation for a second side. There may have been some percentage increment added if there was more than one color. But the difficulty was that reverse engineered approach worked, but it oftentimes produced extremely erratic pricing. So you may find, take example, aluminum 040, which is less expensive or less costly than 080. But there may be scenarios where 080 would price lower or less expensively than the less expensive material. So there were some significant weaknesses in that system. Then in mid 90s, 1995, I believe it was, that's when the Sirius software introduced their first software package, and at that time it was called SMS. It introduced the concept of one-time setup charges. It introduced the per each charge for setting up pricing. It introduced the option of being able to charge for scrap material. And it had a very cursory means of managing material costs where you could tell the system what the material costs were. And there was a little color-coded gizmo that would show you whether you were below a certain threshold or above a certain threshold. But again, that was only related to material. Then in that same time frame, the concept of discounting was standardized, where there was basically a single table for all of the cut vinyl signs, for example, and that discounted heavily on the small size from 1 to 4 square feet, perhaps. And then it kind of disappeared, didn't discount, and then the discounting got stronger as you went out in the sizes. So some big improvements at that time versus the first one that I mentioned, but it still was pretty much area-based exclusively, and there really wasn't much in the way of costing. Then in the mid 80s, I think 2008 or so, that's when Sirius software introduced what we know today as control. And it was the first introduction of what I would consider to be true cost-based pricing, so that the products, what you view as a product, really consisted of what it took to produce that, how much labor, how much equipment time, how much material of different kinds, print what you print to, or what you're laminating with, or what you're mounting it to. So it presented truly the first opportunity, in my judgment, of cost-based pricing. It maintained the area-based concept as well. So you could, if you wanted to ping pong back and forth. So the concept behind the cost-based pricing is that you know your cost of all your parts, labor, equipment, materials. Then each of those parts has a markup or a multiplier. So basically, it takes the cost of the part times the consumption, how much it's used, and then it marks it up from a price standpoint. Then it multiplies by the multiplier. What has always been how do you determine your labor? How do you determine your equipment? And we're going to get into that quite extensively on Thursday. You should, in my judgment, you should always, if you're embracing cost-based pricing totally, or if you're embracing area pricing where you want to include costing, it's imperative that you keep your costs as accurate as possible. I would suggest that you keep an eye on it at least annually. And then if you see, sudden fluctuations in costs, then you should update the material side at least more frequently than that. On the equipment side, there's new equipment coming on the scene frequently. And if you pick up an additional piece of equipment, whether it's a brand new one or another one that's been around that you're just picking up, it's imperative that you introduce that part to control and tell it what the hourly cost is, and then how it's going to be marked up. Same thing is true with labor. You're probably, your labor costs are probably creeping up pretty much on an annual basis. Your responsibility for taxes and benefits, if they're offered, are probably adjusted annually. So those should be reviewed on an annual basis. I'm going to flip over to another screen, and we're going to kind of go back and forth between control. But before we do that, I want to talk about the basics of some of the pricing. I'm going to drag this screen over so I can see. This is the handout document that I would really like you to download. So the green headings and that is area-based pricing, and the black headings are cost-based pricing. So in very, very, very simplistic terms, area-based pricing is going to take perhaps a one-time charge, and that's what it's going to add to the price. And then if there's a per each charge or a per original charge, depending on what the terminology is, it's going to multiply whatever that value is times the quantity. And that's going to be the contribution to the price for the number of originals. Then it's going to look at the material that's involved, what you are charging, what you've elected to charge per square foot for that material, and it's going to multiply that by the number of square feet. And that's going to be the total contribution for the material charge. You may or may not elect to charge for scrap. So if you've got an odd size sign that's not going to consume all of a particular sheet of a substrate, you may elect to charge a different per square foot rate for that scrap, times the number of square feet, and that's the scrap charge. And the price then is simply the sum of the four. Very simplistic view. On the flip side, on the cost-based pricing, you're going to go through a pricing template. You're going to do how many you're going to do, what size they are, what materials you're going to use. And then control is going to say, all right, I need X minutes of equipment time. And it's going to multiply that by the cost, and it's going to multiply it by by the multiplier, and that's the cost, the charge for the equipment. Similarly, all of the labor parts that might be involved, design time, print time, lamination time, mounting time, and others, it's going to take the number of hours that are needed for each of those items, and it's going to multiply it by the rate, and that's going to be the charge for the labor. And then materials similarly. And then the price is a sum. So very simplistic view of what area-based pricing, how it is, what it is, how it works, and then similarly the cost-based concept. Then when you take this down so that you're now interested in being able to know to what degree of profitability you have, that's when it's going to, the concept of gross profit comes in. You're going to take the price, $1,200 that you charge somebody for something, and the system told you that the cost of that was $700. Then your gross profit or your profit margin is the $500. And that $500 expressed as a percentage of the price is your gross margin percentage, or in this example, 41.7%. The beauty of control with the costing in place is that on an order by line item by line item by line item basis, you can always review what your gross margin is. And you should always keep that in the back of your mind as you're going through, and developing your price, your quote for somebody. This is somewhat subjective on my part, but I'll give you my bias. Area-based pricing is considered to be somewhat less reliable. And I say that because it's not real easy to know exactly what that area charge should be, depending on what you might be doing or not doing from a discounting standpoint. You might see a rate of $13 for material that in reality is not 13 because of other factors involved, such as discounting. So it's a little bit less reliable. And without costing involved, you really have absolutely no way of knowing what your gross profit is on a line item. Just simply can't be done unless you have some way of doing that behind the scenes. So if you overstate, your price is overstated if your costs aren't accurate or don't exist. Your price is understated if you're not doing anything with costing. Where cost-based pricing I consider to be the most reliable if your cost of parts for labor, equipment, materials are correct, are accurate, as they can be. And then if you see that you need to nudge something up or down, then it's simply a matter of changing that part cost. And from that point forward, the system is going to take into account that adjustment in the cost of something. And if you see that you need to adjust your pricing, then the multipliers represent the means of doing that. We'll look more deeply at that in a bit. Hang on a second. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to control. And if you're following me with the handout, I'm going to go to, there's going to be a series of I think 5 more pages, okay? So the top part of each of these pages represents the pricing template that you're going to, it's an overview of what's in the pricing template in Control. The screenshot at the bottom is the actual screenshot of what that template would look like in Control. So there's this one. This is area-based pricing, where we're not doing anything with costs, and we're producing a single template to do a printed image, laminate that image, and mount that image to a substrate. So it goes back to the early days of area-based pricing and the other systems that I alluded to, where it was at the product level, what you were selling to the customer. So in this example, there's $15 setup charge, one-time setup charge. There's going to be a $4 per piece setup charge. And then the originals, the substrate, I have two examples. The 990 represents acrylic, and the other one represents aluminum. But it also included the cost of the printed vinyl that you were printing to, and it also includes the cost of the lamination. So this represents a combination of all of those things, so to speak, that you're going to need to produce that sign. And this is what the image looks like in Control. So I'm going to try to ping pong back and forth. And if I see that this is cumbersome, then I'm going to stop doing that. So to do that, I'm going to go up to Setup and Pricing Setup and All Pricing. And then I'm going to go to Product Setup on the top left. And then in the second column, I'll go to the digital print. And we'll spend, this is where your costing comes in. Okay, so that's the basis where some of the part costs are. Now, what I'm going to also do is open up like we're going to do a template, because you can do this on the fly. That's the reason that I'm going this route. So this is the pricing template, and this is the name of that template. But if I pull this down, I have created other templates. In this first one, if I look at the T for the template, now you're looking at the screen that was in that handout. I've said I'm using area-based pricing. I've got the $18 one-time charge, a $4 per piece charge. And in this example, I've said the 990. That's for the acrylic. And you can see that I put a description in there, a print vinyl with lamination to acrylic. Okay. Now the next one that I'm going to go to, I'm going to flip over to my other little cheat sheet here. The second, page 3 of the handout is going to accomplish essentially the same thing. But instead of having one template to do that, there will be 3 templates. So let's come back in and do this one again. And now I'm going to start with this one, area price. Now, if you've got the handout in front of you, the top part of that page has 3 lines. One is I've called custom vinyl print. The second is a custom laminating, and the third is custom mounting. So you're breaking these up, the pricing up into 3 pieces. First, you're going to price the print, the vinyl print, and you're going to see that that's going to have a one-time charge of $6. There's going to be a $4 per original charge, and the $2 per square foot represents the print vinyl. Okay. So the way this is going to work, it's going to be $6, then plus $4 times the number of originals times the $2 per square foot to get the price, the setup price and the vinyl price. Similarly, let's go back over to control. Linda, you're seeing the pricing template, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So if we look at this one, again, we've told it area-based pricing. We've said $6, $4 per original. Now, notice that there isn't anything per square foot. That's because in the part itself, I am wanting them to, when they select a part, that's going to pick up in this case, the $2 per square foot for the material. Okay. So the setup stuff in this example is handled at the template level for the digital print. The substrate, or what you're printing to, is going to come from the material part, i.e. the vinyl. Okay. I'm going to look here at the lamination for just a second. So I picked the laminate, and here I've said vinyl lamination area. And if we come down and look at the template, here it is again. Look at the template parameter. I've said area based, $6 one-time charge, no per square foot charge, because I'm pulling it from the part. And the reason for that is that both that on the print vinyl, you have a single template that says what you're going to do, but because of multiple materials, multiple print vinyl materials that you may use, multiple laminates you may want to use, rather than create a separate template for each of those, we simply have the generic for the setup side of it, and then allow you to choose and set up the individual part for the appropriate area charge of that material. So this is what it looks like on the lamination side. And that, if we look over on the handout, that's the center section of that of the template views before on that bottom part of the page. Let's go back and look at the mounting. Very similar concept. Here is custom mounting area, is what I've named it. Look at the template itself. I've said that it's area, the same $6 charge. So if you think of it, remember when we looked at that first template, the one-time setup charge was $18. Well, magically, that's $6 for the print side, $6 for the lamination side, and another $6 for the mounting side. The per piece, or the per original, was only on the print side. No equivalent for that in the lamination, and no equivalent for that in the mounting side. Okay. Now let's pause for just a second here, and I want to go up and look at the part for let's look at the flat stock first. We'll just work our way down the page. Here's the acrylic, and here's the the pricing. There's the cost. And the user-defined field, that's where I put the cost, the price, I mean, $7.50, okay? And aluminum would be very similar. There's the 18 for the aluminum. And a lamination is 40 cents. And print vinyl that's where the $2 is, okay? So when you get into the second example with we're not interested in the cost side, but if you have a template for the print side, a separate template for the lamination side, and a separate template for the mounting side, now you have three basic templates that you're working with on a day-to-day basis. And then within each of those, the individual materials that you might use, that's where you're going to assess your area charge, okay? That's the two on the area side. I want to pause here to see if we've got questions. We're doing pretty good on time. Any questions? Okay. Now, before we really get into cost-based pricing, or before we get into area-based pricing where we're interested in costs, we need to understand how things are costed in control. I'm going to flip over to the handout so that you can see it a little bit better. Again, the three sets of rows, represent the three templates that we've talked about previously. So the first one is the print vinyl side, the second one is the laminating side, and the third one is the mounting side. There may be some variation. One or two of these numbers may not be exactly what's in control or what is in your version of control. So interpret these numbers as illustration, okay? So control is going to determine the cost of print vinyl by looking to see if there is a setup charge to set up that printer, 7.5 minutes. Then it's going to look to see if there is a setup charge for the labor, 7.5 minutes. Typically, the labor piece of printing, the printer is going to establish the setup time and the hours or the minutes that are required. And the labor is either going to be 100% of that or a percentage of that. So I've obviously set it up as an assumption that the printer labor is going to be determined by the device itself, by the equipment printer, okay? So 7.5 minutes plus, then control will calculate based on the speed of the printer how much print time is involved. And that equals the printer hours. And then inside that printer device is the cost per hour, $10 and a penny. So the printer time or the printer cost is 7.5 minutes plus the print time times the hourly rate and the hourly rate of the printer itself. Labor, similarly. Ink is similar. It's going to look at the number of square feet times the cost per square foot, and that's going to be the print cost. And then the vinyl that you're printing it to. Lamination is very similar. A setup time. Labor is generally going to track with the device, the laminator. Then it's going to calculate the lamination time based on the speed of the laminator, and that's going to represent the lamination cost. And then the labor and the laminator, that's where the cost of 40 cents comes in. Mounting is very similar, okay? So if we look quickly at control, let me flip back over and go to one of these pieces of equipment. Come on. It keeps bouncing on me. A printer. So here's the cost, $10 and a penny. And here's where your settings, will come in for the setup time. Here we go. One-time setup charge per original charge, ink, and then the percentage of. So here it shows that the labor percentage is 80%. So the little spreadsheet that I the concept is the same. It's just not 100%. Okay, and lamination is going to look very much the same way. Now, go back over to the handout. Page 5 is I'm doing area-based pricing, but I want it to be sensitive to the cost side. So the way the print item is set up is the same as what we just talked about. $6 charge for one time, $4 per each charge. For area-based pricing, it's not going to charge separately for the printer, labor, and ink, but it is going to add the $2 for the lamination or for the print material. Lamination, similarly, $6. It's not going to charge for the laminator time. It's not going to charge for labor time. Because indirectly, those are absorbed in the area charge, okay? And then similarly for the substrate, for the aluminum or the acrylic or whatever it is that you're going to mount it to. So these are the templates. They look exactly the way the ones were that we talked about earlier, except that you're pulling the when you're pulling doing a print, it's going to pull the cost and the area charge from the part that you're choosing rather than from the template itself. Lamination is the same thing. So if we look at those again in control, area price, one time per each, nothing square foot, but we're using per square foot, and it's going to pull the part out of the charge, the area charge out of the part. Lamination would be the same thing. Well, here's the mounting. Kind of area to set up the one time per square foot, and it's going to pull the area charge for the part from the part itself. Lamination is going to be the same thing. Any questions on this? Please ask questions.
Paul, we do have a question.
Okay, good.
It is from Adam, and I will unmute you, Adam. 1 second. All right. Adam, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Paul, I did have a quick question. So just kind of summarize everything that you've kind of gone up to this point. With regards to using Cirrus as a purchase ordering system, right, for the materials that we're bringing, the raw material costs we're bringing in, is the system intuitive enough to understand and recognize when my cost of vinyl go up, let's just say by 50 cents, and I start to input that new number to automatically connect it to everything else that it's attached to, right? So much like limbs on a tree saying, hey, you have a bunch of open orders with this new vinyl you just inputted, but I've noticed the cost has gone up. Do you want me to raise the pricing of all these orders so therefore, it's cost accurate versus, cost efficient when we go to close out the orders because now we're running at a loss?
Excellent question. Let's break it down into a couple of scenarios. One, that you say that you completed a quote for someone last week.
Yes, sir.
And it had the costs were used as of that date. Then yesterday you had to update the cost because the price went up of that material. If you were to convert that order from last week, or that estimate from last week, to an order today, the system will prompt you, hey, Adam, the cost has changed. Do you want to honor the cost and therefore the price from the previous quote? Or do you want to keep it the same? Okay? Or adjust it, I mean.
Right,
that's
right.
That's in the context of cost-based pricing.
Right.
If you're area-based pricing, if you change the cost of the material is unrelated to what the price will be. It's going to continue to use the area charge. In other words, in area-based pricing, the cost is the cost. We want you to keep it as current as you possibly can.
Right.
But changing that cost of that part at any point in time is not going to adjust the price unless you adjust the per square foot price of the affected piece by yourself.
I see. So it becomes a manual entry at that point.
Yes. And that's the reason that I am biased, very candidly, very biased to cost-based pricing, because if you change the cost of that material today, every order or every estimate from today, is going to be sensitive to that new cost, and it's going to be sensitive to the price. It's going to, because of if it went up a nickel and your markup is 4, it's going to increase the cost by 20 cents.
Right.
Or not the cost, but the price.
The price, right.
Does that make sense?
Right. No, 100%. So are you factoring that so then cost based versus area based? In this case, in this scenario, then cost based absolutely would work out, because then I could control what my company is doing with regards to raw materials coming in versus finished product going out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I
now,
agree.
another thing
you and I are on the same island, sir. I agree with you 100%. That's where definitely cost basing does, has its merit right at the head of the table, because it does make it a little easier.
What I can't get into here is whether you're using the inventory module, because the changes in cost are handled a little bit differently if you're using the inventory module, where you're made a purchase and you get there's a price change in that purchase. How that cost change gets reflected, it becomes a function of the inventory module in very simple terms, rather than you just changing the cost yourself in the part. Does that make sense to you? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I don't want to venture down a path that I'm going to get myself into trouble with time, but it's a little bit different if you're using the inventory module. But most important piece is, if the cost changes and you're using area-based price, You'll see that in the gross profit going down because the price component is not being affected by that change in cost. That's the important distinction.
I see.
Paul, we do have a couple other questions.
Okay, good.
All right. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Sue. And Sue, I will unmute you. Go ahead, Sue.
Hi, thank you so much. This is so informative. My question is on page 4 of the handout. I'm curious, I know Paul mentioned that the one-time setup of 7.5 minutes is just for illustrative purposes.
Yes.
And I know we don't have that much time, but Paul, it would be great if you could give us a quick rundown on how to arrive at that, what's the logic behind arriving at that calculation.
How does that value get determined?
Yes.
It's more subjective, Sue. For example, in my shop, I charge, I just said, I want 5 minutes or I want 7 minutes to give the production staff the time to get that printer prepared for the next job. Okay. So in the case of a printer, you have to get the material, you have to get it loaded onto the rollers, and you have to get it fed into the printer. So the time is more dependent upon the device itself and your assessment of how long it takes to get that printer set up to work.
How about the time to just rip the files, Paul, to rip them and get them to the printer? Is that not into this cost?
Say that again, Sue. I'm not sure I caught your question fully.
The setup time to prepare the files to reach the printer, the pre-press time to rip the file and get it ready for printing.
No, it's not. It's the setup of the physical printer. Any rip time is separate and distinct.
I guess on graphic design then. All right. Thank you so much, Paul.
Yep. Okay. Linda, was there another one? Okay.
Yes, there was another question, and that is from Evie. So I will unmute you. Are you there? The question that she had, she may not have a microphone. I can't seem to see where are you there, Evie?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to just follow along, but I'm not seeing where these how you're using these templates in Sirius itself. Like you're showing us control screenshots of these templates, and I'm not seeing those in control. I'm not seeing how you're getting to those.
In your system, or you're not seeing how I'm using them here?
On my system, in control 6.1. Like you're showing us templates that you're using in control. Is that actually a module in control?
That's a function of the data.
That's
Go ahead, Linda.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Evie, you may have the V2 version of control, which is an older version of the data set. The data set is paired with the control program. So you may have an older data set. You still can do area-based pricing. It's just set up a little bit different. V3 version is the current product that we're selling, and that is template based.
I see. Well, it's yeah, it certainly appears to be much simpler than what I'm using. Yeah.
That's the new version of the data set.
That's the new version, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That makes that. Yeah, that's understandable.
All right. Last piece, which is the fun one.
Paul, we have one more question.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, and this is Tiffany, and I'll go ahead and unmute you. Okay. You're unmuted, Tiffany. Oh, she doesn't have a mic. What version of control are you using? Paul is using the V3 version of control?
Yes. And that's distinguished. If you go up to setup, not setup, about control.
It's in setup, Paul. It's in it's a user constant that tells you the version of the data set. And we cannot see your version of control if you're doing that. Yeah, now we can see it.
Yeah, I went to setup and then pricing, setup, and all pricing. Then over here on the left column, about a third of the way down, user constants. And then the second column on this data set, it says product info, and then data set version. The version 2 that Linda has said, this version is going to be 3 is the V3. In the data set that's the prior one, that first digit is going to be 2. It might be 2.73. It might be 2.87. It will, but the key is the 2. Okay. All right. Let's try to finish up here a little bit. Now we're talking about cost-based pricing, and obviously we're sensitive to cost. So conceptually, it's going to take the cost of the printer time, the units, and the price is going to be marked up by some multiplier, and that's going to be the equipment piece of the puzzle. Same thing is true with the labor. It's going to take all of the labor costs, multiply them by a multiplier, and that's the labor piece. The ink is going to be the ink cost multiplied by a multiplier, and that's the ink price, and so on. Lamination is going to be a repetition of that. Now, what's important to know is that way back, and I didn't mention this in the historical discussion at the beginning, in cost-based pricing, the big question is, well, what should the multipliers be? What should the multipliers be for equipment? What should they be for labor? What should they be for materials? I did some modeling for control at the very beginning of the control data set being available. That modeling zeroed in on equipment markup being at or around 2.0. Can it wiggle? Yes, but at or around 2.0. Labor would wiggle. It started off at around 2, and in many cases, I see customers that continue to have it around 2, but I'm beginning to see some that bring it slightly under 2, like the 1.65. So don't take the 1.65 as gospel. What you have in your system is appropriate, unless we would do some more in-depth looking to see if that should come down or go up. Okay. Ink is considered to be a material, and the materials are, I'm going to use a slang term, they're all over the wall. That's because every piece of material that you're selling has a different perceived value by the customer, and it's more vulnerable to competitive pressures. So you might see some material parts that have to be really aggressive and low, 2, 2.5, 3. You may see some where there is very little competitive pressure, and your market will allow you to have a higher. I've seen that up in the 5, 6 range. Believe it or not, when we first did the modeling, digital banner material was relatively new. There wasn't a lot of competition in most markets, and those multipliers for digital banner material were up in the double digits. Over the last several years, that number keeps getting smaller and smaller, and is now down in that 4, 4.5 to 5 range. Lamination modeling kept it at about in that 2.5, 2.75 to 2.8 range. It may wiggle. That's perfectly fine. But what the multipliers are is a market-to-market consideration. Now, the templates for cost-based pricing are very simple. So let's do an example of a digital print. I didn't want to go to Explorer. Let's just say that we're going to use a custom roll print. That's the term, and it's going to be, if we look at the template, all we're telling it is this guy is cost-based, no other parameters. So if you look at the handout for the digital print, the same handout for the lamination side and the mounting side, all you're going to see in the respective templates is saying, hey, control, we're using cost-based pricing. That's all it needs to know. So there's no values to put in, as long as the cost of the various materials is been specified, and as long as each of those parts either use a default multiplier based on the type of part, equipment, or labor or material, or a custom part markup. Most of the mounted materials probably are going to be, you're probably going to use a custom markup. We've got another few minutes. This has been an interesting topic to do. It's one that's dear to my heart, and it's a difficult one to really talk about without getting into too much detail. But you can't run the risk of not covering everything. So I hope that this has been meaningful. If you have any questions, either reach out to the consulting staff or bring more questions to the table on Thursday. And ahead of time, if you can, please download those handouts for Thursday because we'll reference them quite a bit like we did today. Any last minute questions?
Yes, we do have another question from Adam. Adam, I will unmute you. All right.
Great. Hey, thank you both. Paul, I appreciate all the information this morning. It's been wonderful. I did have one last question, though.
Sure.
Getting back to the labor component now with regards to cost-based pricing, how should I be looking at this with regards to increases in employees' hourly rate? Hypothetically, Mark comes in and he's like, hey, I've been here a year. I'm doing really great. I want a raise. And then I augment his or change his hourly rate, say from $10 an hour to $11. How should I be looking at to impact everything that we've just talked about this morning? Or does it at all?
I'm not going to give you an answer today because I want you to come back on Thursday. And that's a significant, that's a third topic on our agenda on Thursday.
Okay.
How in the world do you determine what your labor costs are?
Yes, sir.
And how do you go about doing that? It's just a real simple answer. In a perfect world, you're going to need to get some data out of your payroll system as far as what you paid your people and how many hours they worked. That's the first piece of the puzzle. Second piece of the puzzle, you need to know out of your general ledger system what your responsibility was as far as the employer paid taxes,
right,
medical benefits, insurance benefits. In other words, benefits that you paid for those employees.
Right.
And then lastly is the fixed cost. What's it cost you to open the doors? So what are the cost factors that are static for the most part? And those are going to be the third piece to determine what the labor costs should be that you put into control.
Wow.
We've got there'll be a tool where you can work through those, and we'll illustrate how that works on Thursday.
I'm excited for Thursday because that's especially for us here on the West Coast where we're paying an exorbitant amount of taxes. You're absolutely right. Those little pain threshold points can absolutely make or break a deal, right? Because you think you're ahead of the game, you close the deal, you're like, hey, I got 20 points, 20 gross profit points, I did really good. But then you just get to the minutia of really starting to factor out, like, what did labor really cost me? What did machine time cost me? And then by the time you figure out, like, oh, I really wound up at 9, at a gross point out of 9. I thought it was at 20, and it's a bad wake up call because you're like, whoa, I conceivably lost money on this, or it was a straight pass through at best.
Yeah, we will look in detail at the 2 template tools that will be posted and available to anybody that will address the equipment side. How do you determine what it is? And then secondly, the labor side, and how do you determine what labor cost should be? And
for everybody on the phone too, that's I'm sure hearing my voice, the other part of this equation, which I always consider the X factor, is how many times a certain material or product is touched throughout the whole process. I'm trying to teach my people that now with regards to every time you touch a job, you're putting your labor number to it, which is extracting out my profitability. So hypothetically, if shipping receiving sits on some vinyl for too long, that's factoring my overall cost. If design and artwork is taking far too long, you're taking money out of the profitability. So by the time the job gets out the door, everybody's high-fiving each other saying, oh, we did a great job. It's like, no, too many people touched this job. You yanked all the profitability out. Right? Because the minute an owner touches it, now you're gone. Your profit's out the door.
Now the way to look at that is that when you generate a quote,
right,
or you write up an order based on the things that we've talked about today, it's going to say, all right, the estimated cost of this project is $500. Now, getting into your point, as your people are working that through the production process and how many hands it touches, the actual amount of time for this piece of equipment is X instead of Y. Same thing is true with the labor. Same thing is true with the materials. So then if you're using that component of control of the estimated and capturing the actual cost, the price isn't changing. But if the actual costs were because of too many hands touching it and taking too much time, that erodes your gross margin. And control will tell you that if you're capturing the actual time. If you're just depending on it at the estimated level, it'll give you a point of reference at what it should be. Now the next piece of the puzzle is, what did it actually cost to produce? And that's a different topic, for within control. In fact, I think we'll get into it next in June.
That sounds great. Love it. I'm already there.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope it's been good.
Thank you,
100%.
everyone.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.